Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle have been using today's hearing to distort common sense measures implemented during the pandemic to protect public health and reduce the threat of COVID-19, which, by the way, is still with us. Both of my parents have COVID right now. They characterize these measures as government overreach and infringement on the individual liberties afforded to every person in the United States. And so I'd like to spend my time correcting the record on how they're distorting the facts. Though the title of today's hearing, through this title, my colleagues have suggested that public health officials systematically and intentionally acted in defiance of the Constitution during the pandemic. This simply is not the case. In fact, the overwhelming majority of pandemic-era public health policies, be they suspensions of in-person gatherings or vaccination and masking requirements, have been upheld by the courts. On free speech grounds, they have been upheld for meeting the standard of viewpoint neutrality. And on free exercise grounds, they've been upheld for satisfying the neutral and general applicability standard put forward by Justice Antonin Scalia. Professor Schwartzman, could you remind us again of the meaning of these legal standards?
Yes, the phrase neutral and generally applicable, which is the standard for free exercise under the First Amendment, comes from a decision that was written by Justice Scalia on behalf of the Supreme Court in 1990 called Employment Division versus Smith, a case involving Native American challenge to a prohibition on the use of peyote. And what it means is that the government is not permitted to target religious actors for special burdens. It can't persecute them. It can't act with the purpose of discriminating. But as long as the law is neutral, it's not based on religious hostility, and is generally applicable, it applies to a wide range of actors, not only those who are religious. It's subject to a deferential standard of review. That means that the Supreme Court won't mandate religious exemptions from those kinds of laws, which is what characterizes most public health regulations.
Thank you. And in your testimony, you talked about how First Amendment activities, including speech and religious activities, can be regulated to safeguard Americans' public health. And as such, public health policies that meet these standards were upheld by the court and were not infringing on the Constitution. Is that correct?
That's correct. In many cases, the Supreme Court allowed public health regulations to stand. Those included some capacity limits. The Supreme Court has been asked to intervene on multiple occasions to invalidate vaccine mandates on religious liberty grounds. It has refused to do so. It also let stand an order that required state actors to, and public schools and private schools as well, to not to have in-person learning over a temporary time period, the winter of 2020. All of those orders the Supreme Court allowed to remain in place, ostensibly because they're neutral and generally applicable.
Thank you. The suggestion that Democrats take for granted the Constitution and the rights it affords every person is dangerous and it is misleading. In fact, it's false. It undermines confidence in our institutions during times of crisis and erodes faith in our American system of government. I'd also like to note that churches were not specifically targeted through public health measures or synagogues, as we've heard, implemented by the Biden administration. And these measures did not prevent people of faith from worship. I was able to worship virtually. The faith community I participate in had outdoor services, and we had parking spaces that were reserved, and people got out their lawn chairs, and we worshiped together outside safely. Many religious institutions found innovative ways to enable their members to continue to practice their faith, be it through virtual, outdoor, or hybrid options. And many are using them today, particularly for people who we pray for as sick and shut in, who can now turn on YouTube or Facebook Live and participate with their congregations, even with emojis. So Professor Schwartzman, with my remaining 5 seconds, I'd like to give you just a moment to correct the record on anything that you might want to share with the committee.
Thanks. I just want to agree with you that religious communities had to be creative in responding to the pandemic. I don't mean to minimize the burdens on them. They were really serious burdens, but they also acted with a sense that conforming with public health regulations was important and often consistent with their own religious obligations to save lives.
Thank you, and I yield back.